In our last lecture, we explored Kierkegaard's critique of the failure of apologetics in proving Jesus Christ's doctrines and what he was teaching through rational means. So I want to pick up our exploration of this discussion in terms of being contemporaneous with Jesus Christ. This is a critical component of Kierkegaard's critique of Christianity. He says, in order for one to be a follower of Jesus, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you must place yourself in the contemporary context as if living in the day of Jesus Christ. And unless one comes to being contemporaneous with Jesus, then the decisive element will not be met. The choice will not, you can never make an adequate or sufficient faith choice unless you come to that point of being contemporaneous with Jesus. So he wants us to keep in mind that when Jesus made his call, when Jesus Christ made his call to come to him in his life ministry, he did that in a situation of humiliation and poverty and so forth. He did not say this, he did not ask people to come to him in a state of glory, but in his state of humiliation. And it's important to keep that in mind, that when people come to Christ, they must come to him in the situation that he lived. He lived in poverty and very harsh circumstances. He says this on page 58. There is an endless yawning difference between God and man, and hence, in the situation of contemporaneousness, to become a Christian proved to be an even greater torment and misery and pain than the greatest human torment, and hence also a crime in the eyes of one's neighbors. And so it will always prove when becoming a Christian in truth comes to mean to become contemporary with Christ. And if becoming a Christian does not come to mean this, then all the talk about becoming a Christian is nonsense and self-deception and conceit, in part even blasphemy and sin against the second commandment. What is he saying? He is saying coming to identify with Jesus Christ in his contemporary situation brought you into circumstances most unfavorable. Here was this man walking in low conditions and humiliation, surrounded by fishermen and people of dubious character and so forth. And to identify with this man had very historical consequences for one's decision. He goes on to add this on page 59. History you can read and hear about as referring to the past. Here, if you like, you can form your judgment according to the upshot. But Christ's life on earth is not a past event. In its time 1800 years ago, it did not wait, nor does it wait now, for any assistance from the upshot. A historical Christianity is nonsense and unchristian confusion. For what true Christians there are in each generation are contemporary with Christ, have nothing to do with the Christians of former generations, but everything with the contemporary Christ. His earthly life accompanies the race and accompanies every generation in particular as eternal history. He goes on to add, if thou canst not prevail upon thyself to become a Christian in the situation of contemporaneousness with him, or if he in the situation of contemporaneousness cannot move thee and draw thee to himself, then thou wilt never become a Christian. Thou mayest honor, praise, thank, and reward with all worldly goods him who maketh thee believe thou nevertheless art a Christian, but he deceiveth thee. Thou mightest count thyself fortunate if thou wert not contemporary with anyone who dared to say this. He's saying, Kierkegaard is making the notion, bringing forth the argument that unless you become contemporary with Christ, you place yourself in the contemporary situation in which he made his call to come to him, you will never be truly Christian. Despite the fact that the institution Christianity may tell you that you are a Christian, Kierkegaard says no decisive step has been made. You have become a Christian without even noticing it. It is part and parcel. It is part of the environment that you live in. Everybody's a Christian. Everybody's a Christian. Therefore, I don't have to make a choice, and so forth. He says this is absolute deception. And he also adds this. He says, "For that is the way that thou must take to learn to get training in fleeing to grace in such a way that thou dost take it in vain, that thou dost not take it in vain." That the grace necessary to understand that you must make a decisive decision to follow this man, Jesus Christ, in his contemporary situation. And in coming to that point, which grace provides, one can truly make a decisive decision to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And again, Kierkegaard wants to emphasize that Jesus Christ's life is the paradigm. When you come to Jesus Christ, your life is not to be in conformity to the established church, which he sees as pure mockery of Christianity. One must come to the notion that the life of Christ is the paradigm for what your life must be. And unless you adopt that paradigm, you are not a follower of Jesus Christ. That's what he called when he made his calling to follow him. That's what it implied. It was a following in his paradigm, in his steps, in the life pattern that he walked. So very critical to keep that in mind. Kierkegaard says on page 94, he adds, "Every generation has to begin all over again with Christ, and thus to present his life as the paradigm." Kierkegaard is saying you cannot inherit Christianity. It cannot be passed down through generation. Every generation must come to terms on its own point, must become contemporary with Christ. And unless one becomes contemporary with Christ, you're in deception. Somebody has made a decision for you, whether that be the culture that you live in, the civilization that you live in. They've made a decision that everybody here is Christian. Kierkegaard said this is mass deception. This sort of Christian notion that you can be born into it is utter travesty of the biblical teaching of what Christianity it is. So I think it's important to keep in mind. Let's take a look at what Kierkegaard uses as a foundational passage in his critique. In the Gospel of Matthew 11:28, Kierkegaard sees this as the point of contemporaneousness with Christ. In 11:28, Jesus Christ makes the comment, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Right? Come hither to me, and I will give you rest. Kierkegaard says, look, you must understand the situation in which Jesus Christ made that statement. He said that in a very low point in terms of physical possessions. Right? He was a poor man. He walked as a renunciate, as an ascetic, and he's calling people to come to him. Right? Come to him in his humiliation, not in his glory. Right? And this is a critical component of what he has to teach. And Kierkegaard says this on page 51. He says, "And to come to his principal companions, his apostles, what madness, not to say new madness, for this is a piece with the foregoing. His apostles are a bunch of fishermen who yesterday caught herring and tomorrow go out into all the world and change the face of the whole world. And it is he who says he is God, and these are his duly appointed apostles. Is it he that is to assure respect for the apostles, or is it perhaps the apostles that are to ensure respect for him? Is he the inviter, a crazy visionary? Who is this man who claims to be God, telling people to come to him? Well, what life condition does he live in? Come to this man, Jesus. Adopt him as your paradigm. Yet he lives a very unsavory life. He lives a life of poverty and so forth. Why would I come to this man?" He says that this seems to be madness on page 51. Why? What benefit can I get out of coming to this man? Right? So again, that notion of being offended, Kierkegaard wants to highlight. The word in the Greek is scandalizo. Scandalizo. We get the word scandal from it. Do not be offended. We see that in Matthew 11:6. Do not be offended. What is he saying? He's saying this is the offense. That this man, Jesus Christ, he's claiming to be God. He does things as divine. He forgives people's sins. This is offensive to the religious establishment of his day. This man, this human man, is walking in forgiving sins and so forth. This is scandalous. He says to come to Jesus, why he's in this as this sort of madman. This was the critical decisive factor in determining if one is authentic in one's decision. He says, he makes note of on page, I believe, 34, that if Jesus Christ was this sort of Santa Claus figure, that anybody would go to him. He says on page 33, come hither, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Oh, when these words are uttered by a fashionable man in a silk gown, with a pleasant and sonorous voice, which resounds agreeably with the lovely vaulted ceiling, a silken man who bestows honor and repute upon all who hear him. Oh, when a king says this, who is clothed in purple and velvet, with a Christmas tree in the background, how splendid this is! He's got gifts to. If coming to Christ was this overwhelming blessing, that Jesus Christ is the Santa Claus figure giving gifts out to people and so forth, anybody would come to that. Kierkegaard says that's not the life condition in which Christ made his calling. Christ said this in deprivation, in a life of privation and poverty and hardship that had very harmful, detrimental consequences in becoming a Christian. Right? You're making a choice in following Jesus that may, in the end, cost you your life. He says this is critical. This is critical in becoming a Christian. When you come to him, you must adopt this sort of notion that this may be your life. This may be the life that will be set for you. He adds on page 39, speaking of Jesus, what has he done to provide for his future? Nothing. Has he any definite job? No. What prospect has he? None. To speak only of a minor consideration, what will he do to pass the time when he grows old? The long winter nights, how will he occupy them? Why, he cannot even play cards. He enjoys some popular favor, true, but to join myself to this, right, have I lost my wits? What is it? What is in joining Christianity and following this man? What benefit do I get out of this? I see no benefits. This man is a fanatic. He's talking about being God. He's under threat. Why would I wish to follow this man? This doesn't seem very sane. He has no job and wants me to go around the world like an itinerant preacher with no sort of income and so forth. This is foolishness to come to this man. Kierkegaard also brings the notion of the delayer in mind. On page 42, he says this, all right, this sort of delayer approach. Well, I may come to this man, Jesus Christ. I need to see more of the consequences of how this will play out. In the moment, being contemporary with Jesus, I can't follow along. I don't wish to be subjected to that sort of misery. So I'm going to delay my judgment, my decisive choice. I want to see how the consequences play out with this man. And if they turn out favorably, then I'll decide to join the group and so forth. He says this is absolutely, there will never be a decisive moment for this individual. You cannot come to God through consequences. So let's go back to this notion of offense. This is critical. This is a critical component of his critique. The offense, the scandalizo, the scandal. This man is claiming to be God, this God man, forgiving sins. He says, we are at a crossroads. Every one of us are at a crossroads. You either believe that Jesus Christ is who he is, or you are offended. And he brings several scripture passages to bear on this thought. He says, and you see this in his passages, the scandal, the same word being used, scandalizo. It's scandalous. This man, this is offensive. This guy is doing things that are offensive to the religious establishment. He's not walking according to our standards. So everybody is at a crossroads when they come to Jesus. Either you come through the faith route or you leave offended. And for Kierkegaard, there is no other middle ground. And this is the stumbling block. This is the stumbling block. Either I'm going to be offended that this man claims to be Yahweh, God incarnate, a foolish man, a madman, or I'm going to come to faith that this man is, who he says he is. So there's a dialectical tension Kierkegaard makes note of. Right? There's a tension. Either it's one or the other. Either you're going to accept him as who he is and what he stands for, or you're going to leave offended. And there's no middle ground whatsoever. He does say on page 84 that miracles in the works of Jesus can make one attentive, bring one to attention that this man is doing extraordinary things. You may want to pay attention to who this guy is. But again, it doesn't bring you to faith. It won't bring you to faith. Right? These are not clear demonstrations. Right? When Jesus Christ does a miracle, it doesn't bring everyone to automatic faith to him. In the opposite, many turn away from him in the end. And here is one of Kierkegaard's major critiques. He says, established dominant Christianity has removed the scandal. Has removed the scandal. Nobody needs to come to the point of making a decision at that point. He says, and this is on page 88, 89, there is but one way to avoid the offense, by believing. But he who believes has passed through the offense. He says on page 89, and in the situation of contemporaneousness, everyone will take notice of the offense. But in Christendom, we have all become Christians without taking notice of that which incidentally is the Christian weapon of defense against speculative comprehension. That people do not even, they slip into Christianity as if it was a sock. They don't have to deal with the scandalizo. They don't have to deal with the contemporaneousness of seeing this man walk around in a state of humiliation saying, come to me, believe me that I am God incarnate, and dealing with this, with the consequences with that. Now in established Christianity, everybody is a Christian. We don't have to deal with the scandal. The scandal has already been solved. Right? He says this is pure blasphemy. This is a mockery of Christianity. Kierkegaard's next point is his critique that Christianity is a doctrine. That Christianity is a doctrine that you merely assent to. Again, this goes back to his critique of proofs and apologetics. That a scandal, you can teach the doctrine of the scandal. Preachers can preach about the scandal, but that's not the same as being contemporary with Christ and dealing with the scandal on a one-to-one basis. Either I am going to choose to follow this man in his deprivation, this man who others say is foolish and a raving fanatic, or I'm going to be offended. There's only two options here. He says the notion that just teaching this as a doctrine is not Christianity. And here is his existentialist bent. He says there's no one made a decisive choice for this. Unless Christianity is seen as a choice, that Jesus Christ is making a call, come to me. A choice has to be made. And unless that choice is made, there is no coming. Right? Either you come or you don't. If you teach Christianity as a doctrine, you ignore this critical component. No choice has to be made. We are all Christians. We don't have to make a choice in this. It's as if it's some sort of scientific theory Here's this theory. Here's the data that we have on it. Accept it or not. Right? It makes no life consequences whatsoever. It's just a mental construct. Kierkegaard says this is blasphemous Christianity. This is paganism. One must come to terms on a personal basis, either to reject him or to be offended. Only two options. And unless that one comes to that point, no Christianity is made. So hence, for Kierkegaard, voluntary choice, unless you come to terms with either the offense or faith, right? There is no Christianity. So for Christianity, for those who are going to come to Christianity, Kierkegaard highlights the notion of what it meant for these contemporary believers in Jesus Christ. He says that Jesus Christ was persecuted in his age. In the time that he lived, he was seen as a madman, a fanatic. He was rejected and derided by the masses and so forth, especially the religious establishment. That this Christianity seemed to be nothing but madness. And in this sort of situation, one must suffer persecution. You're going to suffer persecution from your family, from the synagogue, and so forth. Hence, Christianity is a struggle. We see this throughout the writings of the New Testament as well. It is a struggle against the world system. That the world works in opposition to the judgments of Jesus Christ and so forth. And suffering has to be met. All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution as Christ suffered. Right? There is a suffering. Suffering is intrinsic to Christianity. And he calls this the denial, self-denial. He brings us, and again, living Christ as the paradigm of self-denial and renunciation, pulling away from the things of the world. And we could see this in his own life in terms of his sacrifice. He wrote a book called Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard wrote, in which Abraham was tested to sacrifice what he loved. He loved his son Isaac, the son of his heir, and he was commanded by God to sacrifice his son. A trial of suffering, I'm sure, tremendous mental anguish. That sort of component is critical, and if one is to adopt Christianity, one will live a life of self-denial, and that may mean giving up things that you love in terms of the sensual, in terms of the worldly pleasures and so forth. These things must be discarded for holiness and for righteousness. And in the terms of Kierkegaard's life, he was engaged to marry a woman named Regina and to be married to her. And he decided that this was not his calling, that Christianity entails a sacrifice. And he gave Regina up. He chose the path of Christianity, of suffering for Christian truth. And he attacks the notion of marriage as well as being not conducive towards Christianity and living the Christian life. He says, Kierkegaard says on page 103, that in 104, that marriage makes one sort of in this sort of contemporary approach. And we'll pick that next theme on our next lecture.